Welcome to a special episode of the Georgia Politics Podcast. I am your host, Preston Thompson. We are joined this morning by Mayor of Alpharetta, Jim Gilvin. Mr. Mayor, thank you for taking time out of your busy week and joining us this morning.
My pleasure, Preston. Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it. I think the first question is very obvious. You've just announced your campaign for re-election as mayor. I know this was kind of always the plan. You were elected as a special election. I think you were always planning on running for a full term, but I'm curious to hear what your general pitch is on the campaign trail of, in the past, however long I've been in office, this is what we've gotten done, and this is why I deserve your vote a second time.
Right. Well, and thank you once again for having me on it. You're right. When I ran last year and I knew I was only going to be elected for 1 year, I would not have done that had I not thought, I probably should run.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
It is a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot to put your family through. It's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So it's not a decision that you take lightly. But I think the thing that I'll be telling people this year is very similar to what I did last year, although now I've got a year under my belt to show them that I'm in it. I ran 8 years ago because I thought that the city of Alpharetta had a wonderful opportunity to remain a unique city as it continued to evolve and grow into the city that it's becoming now. But I think that it needed a leader who wanted to make sure we retained that balance, that Southern charm as we continued to evolve. And so my pitch last year was, guys, we're going to focus on the basics. We're going to try to do a little bit better job of balancing the unique opportunities we have with the growth that has been tremendous over the last 8 years. And we've been tremendously successful in building the economy because 8 years ago we were in a recession. Mm-hmm. We had no Avalon. There was no city center project. There was just a lot of opportunities that needed momentum. And we've built that momentum, and now we've grown into the next generation of, okay, what next? How do we continue to do things that are unique and special that make Alpharetta a great place to live and do business? And so I think over the last year, I've shown people that I'm in it. And I think we've done a great job of balancing growth and development with the new project coming forward at North Point Mall, which is going to be really tremendous as far as setting the tone for how we evolve over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you mention that balance before, other times. I know you've got a couple big developments that have completed and some coming up, like Windward Park, North Point Mall. What sort of level does public input play into keeping that balance of we want to make this a development that businesses will come to, but also people will use?
Right. Well, and that's a great question because, balance doesn't really mean anything if you're not willing to define it. And
sure.
I define balance as I'm elected by 67,000 people in the city of Alpharetta. And I, way back when in college, I took a production management class, and it focused primarily around a book called The Goal, which is theory of constraints. But basically, the whole premise was, regardless of whether you're in a manufacturing environment or a technology company or in government, if you're not working towards the goal, then anything else is just static. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the goal of Alpharetta is what the city of Alpharetta residents want it to be. Now, that doesn't mean we can do anything we want as a community. I took an oath to defend the Constitution, and I take that very seriously. And we know we can't achieve our goals as a local community without tremendous partnerships, without the major investors that build and finance developments in Alpharetta. We can't do that without the major employers who make it an attractive place, because the 50,000 people who come here to work and shop and play during the day are what leave us the amenities we have on the weekends and the evenings.
Sure.
And so you can't be exclusive of that, but I do think it's the people of Alpharetta who set the vision for the future. And that's kind of why I ran in the first place, is because there's tremendous pressure from other people outside of Alpharetta to evolve into something that benefits either their personal interests or their businesses or the region as a whole. And that's not bad. We all have to work together. But the goal, from my perspective, is what do the people of Alpharetta want us to be in 30 years? And that's kind of where I'm at.
So you've got 50,000 people coming in to work.
At least.
67 to 70,000 people voting and living here. A lot of people would argue that a lot of these cities in North Fulton weren't built for that size of population, and that's why we have some transportation issues. I know you've, heavy rail gets thrown around a lot. Mm-hmm. It's expensive. I'd love to hear first your thoughts on that and maybe what could be some alternatives to that going forward, because that will be the burning question for the next lifetime or the next generation for North Fulton cities is how do we move people around better than we're doing right now?
Right. And you're being too easy on me, man. I've been talking about that for 15 years,
sure,
long before I ever ran for office. Specifically heavy rail. Heavy rail for a long time, going back to what I said was the goal. What is the goal of Alpharetta? What is the goal of the people who live here and the businesses that are invested here? If you look at just the objective data around heavy rail, it doesn't help traffic. It just doesn't. Sandy Springs has worse traffic now than it ever had before it opened all the MARTA stations. So there are advantages to heavy rail in certain environments. It's certainly good for economic development. The challenge is it's paid by taxpayers who don't ride it. It's funded and still is proposed a higher transportation sales tax to fund heavy rail. Heavy rail, and all the data supports this, is the most expensive, the least flexible, and least efficient mode of transportation possible for any transit. So what I've been having discussions with for well over 10 years is if we're going to try to build a transit development that actually serves the people in a suburban environment specifically, but throughout the metro area, we need something. We're in a technological world where change happens rapidly. Uber didn't exist 10 years ago when I started talking about this. Autonomous vehicles were something that the Jetsons talked about. So everything in the world right now is moving so rapidly and changing so quickly. It makes no sense to spend billions of dollars to try to force an 18th century transportation solution in a world that's evolving so quickly. By the time it would be built, it would be obsolete.
Is that the same pitch you give to businesses that are looking to move places? I mean, I know we saw a recent vote happen in Gwinnett County where there was some talk from the business leaders in that community of new businesses are going to move to a place where there's at least some form of mass transit. I mean, people want to be able to get around, and that's
Absolutely.
one of the things that's influenced State Farm moving to the perimeter is they've got perimeter MARTA stations there. Is that roughly the same pitch you give to a business as the spokesperson of the city?
Well, what I pitch to businesses is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What they're trying to solve is attracting and retaining good talent. So if you sell them on a solution that's not accomplishing what they want, you're not helping them. What I explain to them is, and that's why I'm excited that finally over the 15 years that I've been having these discussions, people are starting to come around. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, Mayor Belle Isle and I went down and talked to Keith Parker, who was the former CEO of MARTA. Primarily, David wanted to talk to him about the possibility of an express train route that would go from North Springs down to the airport, which he thought would have tremendous value for North Fulton. It's not feasible. Keith made it pretty clear within 30 seconds. Guys, we don't have billions to build an additional rail, which is a problem with heavy rail. Mm-hmm. You can't have an express because it costs too much to build an accessory rail to bypass stations and go straight through.
Can't have one running from one point to one point and every other train stopping at every.
Absolutely. I mean, look at now. A lot of people take MARTA trains from North Springs to the airport, but it stops and it takes 45 minutes. So unless it's a heavy rush hour, you're generally not saving a tremendous amount of time. But the issue is, what we have on the table now is BRT, bus rapid transit. My point was the solution to attracting and retaining talent is getting people from where they want to live to where they want to work and where you can work. So if you're proposing something that's tremendously expensive, won't happen for 20 years, and isn't flexible enough to get them from where they live to where you want them to work, then are you really solving the problem? My proposal is no, that doesn't solve the problem. What it helps is the major commercial and property investors who are along that rail station, because it certainly makes it easier for them to charge higher rates to fill their buildings and things like that, which is great. More power to them. But if you really want to solve the mobility issue and make it possible for good employees to move from wherever they live to wherever they work, you need something that's flexible, fast, and efficient. And that's what Bus Rapid Transit offers. That's why we're so excited. So what I tell them is, guys, I know you're being told that this is the solution, but the solution really is something that's going to help you in the near future, is feasible, is financially practical, and can move them from where they need to be to where they're going.
I don't want to venture too much into hypotheticals, but
Sure.
I've seen some leaders in other North Fulton cities see a bus go along like Holcomb Bridge, and they look and it's empty. And it's disheartening because they've invested in more stops and bus rapid transit and a trolley system, whatever it is like that. What happens in 5 years, 10 years if we try something that's supposed to move people around from, where they are to where they want to be, and nobody's using it? I mean, I think that's the biggest complaint. Even you said yourself about MARTA is you look at the heavy rail and the people who are paying for it are not the people who are using it. What happens then? Are there more alternatives past bus rapid transit?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with the total premise there, but I don't think there's been an investment in transit in North Fulton in 30 years. They've moved a couple of routes around, but we've spent billions of dollars of taxpayer money from residents of North Fulton, and we've gotten diddly squat for the most part. So the reason people aren't riding MARTA up here is because it doesn't pick them up where they are and take them where they want to be. And there's a difference between the trains that were proposed and bus rapid transit, because bus rapid transit, if it's implemented in Georgia 400 like it's supposed to, and I believe it could be, assuming that MARTA makes good decisions, which is questionable in and of itself, you would be able to hop on a BRT transit bus at Windward Parkway and be at North Springs in 8 minutes. That's not what you can do now. Right now, you hop on a bus at Windward Parkway in rush hour, you sit in traffic all the way to North Springs, just like if you were in your car, and then you're moving to another transit that has to stop 20 times or whatever before you get to the airport. So BRT, if we had moving lanes now, transit could move rapidly. You could get from where you are to where you need to be. So the difference is right now, there's really no investment in transit up here.
Whether it's with MARTA or with the new the ATL board, do you think Alpharetta and maybe North Fulton in general has adequate representation when these big decisions are being made at the million and billion-dollar level?
No, I don't. I mean, it's just as simple as that. I've been to some of the ATL meetings. That's a joke.
So what's the way to rectify that situation then? Is there one, or do we start over and Alpharetta kind of, secedes from the transit union almost and kind of goes its own way?
I think government is in place to solve things that can't be solved by the private sector. I think there's always going to be inefficiency and a lack of equitable representation on a government entity that's making decisions on a regional basis. But I think the private market, if we have infrastructure in place, going back to the BRT and the Georgia Flex lanes, which will operate so that 4 lanes, 50% of additional capacity will be moving at a minimum of 45 miles an hour. Once that's done, if MARTA makes bad operating decisions that don't serve the public, there's infrastructure in place where the private sector will. So I don't have much hope for any regional board or NGO to step up and efficiently run transit. I think there's got to have a component of public transit because there's some needs that will not be met by the private sector. There's just not a business model that'll do it. But the challenge we have now is there's only one business model, and it's MARTA. And until we've provided infrastructure that allows technological innovation and flexibility and efficiency, then we're stuck with what we got, and that's not very good.
Along that same theme, you were formerly a city councilor. Now you're mayor. In both groups, you've had to deal with the relationship between the city and the state. And in this past legislative session, as a lot of our listeners to the regular show would know, that relationship got tested a few times, and the Georgia Municipal Association got involved. How are you managing now in your new role that relationship, and what do you see the role of the state is in supporting the vision of Alpharetta that you have of this balance for the future?
It's certainly different being mayor, because as the mayor, you're pretty much the de facto figurehead. You really have no choice about that. When it comes to voting and things like that, it's a group decision. I only have one vote out of 7, and I've got a great council around me to help make those decisions. But as mayor, I am pretty much the spokesperson, so I have to be very careful in that relationship. But I'll be honest, I didn't run for mayor because I wanted to be in politics. I ran for mayor out of frustration with the way things had been done sometimes in the past. Same reason I ran for city council. And I pretty much try to hold myself to the same standards that I do in my private life. I think politicians are just people. We get our pictures in the paper and people recognize us and things like that. But there's good and bad in politics. There's good people and there's questionable motives in politics. And so in my personal life, I've spent 54 years trying to treat people like they treat me. I give people the benefit of the doubt. And if they burn me, then I learn from that. And I don't have a lot of patience for people that aren't honest and candid and open and motivated to help solve problems. So as much as possible, I just avoid dealing with people who are hypocrite politicians.
Well, we had, in the session this past year, we had issues of building code with local control, 5G expansion with local control. And a lot of times these came before the House, and local control wasn't really a topic of conversation. How do you confront those issues? And do you think there needs to be an increased voice in people that have your position in cities across the state of this isn't something you should be deciding where you are, this is something we should be deciding where we are?
I do believe in local control. I think one of my disappointments is that so many of the people who serve in the State House have not served on local boards, local commissions, and things like that, because when it comes to major federal issues, they're all for federalism. Send us the check and we'll figure out how to spend it for transportation and all these kind of things. And I don't think many of them have that context on a local level here within the state, because I think, much like the private sector, competition wins. And when you have state bodies with good intentions, I generally believe they do intend well, and a lot of times the outcomes are beneficial. But I think when you try to dictate a policy that encompasses Butler, Georgia, the city of Butler, Georgia, or Cuthbert, Georgia, and the city of Alpharetta and Sandy Springs, we're very different cities. We're different populations. We have different needs. We have different capabilities. And I think sometimes the lobbyists who have the ear of many of the state's representatives, they don't really care about those differences. They don't really care about the nuances of a policy that benefits Alpharetta as opposed to Cuthbert, or Macon as opposed to Cochran, and things like that. The lobbyists are generally advocating a position that benefits the person who's paying them to lobby. Probably my greatest frustration over the past year was with the Georgia Municipal Association, because they're an organization that's supposed to represent all the cities of Georgia, which is 530 or something like that. They're supposed to know those nuances. They're supposed to represent the differences and support things that help all of us. And they failed us several times in this last legislative session.
Is there, you were just mentioning that there's differences between cities across the state. So the Georgia Municipal Association obviously represents all of those cities. Mm-hmm. is there another solution of, maybe having more independent representation, putting people, like a city administrator in the Capitol and letting you know what Alpharetta thinks, not just what GMA thinks? Because, that's not the first time I think some of our listeners have heard that complaint about GMA.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we're exploring right now. I don't know about having a city employee down there. I'm not sure that makes any sense, really. Mm-hmm. There's so many good people who have the contacts, who know how to work within the system to help get your message out. But I do know that there's several other municipalities around Georgia that have gone independently and have their own lobbyists or representatives down there. I think we've got to consider it, because for me, as mayor of Alpharetta, to have a lobbyist who is supposedly representing my residents down at the State House, undermining our positions and what's in our residents' best interest, is unacceptable. That can't continue.
We talk a lot on the show about the recent election we had in 2018, the very, entertaining, I think might be the wrong word for the legislative session that we just had because of new representatives in suburban Atlanta and a very close governor's race. As a locally elected official, what do you take away from the 2018 cycle, both positively and negatively, about your area? And maybe a changing outlook for Georgia and maybe elections coming up too?
There's several good things. I think the takeaway I had from the last November elections primarily was one of disappointment, only because what I'm seeing, one of the reasons I enjoy being a locally elected official is we really get to stay out of the national politics, and it's become so divisive on a national level. It's distasteful. I wouldn't want to operate in that environment, because on a local level, you've got people, regardless of what party they are, they're going to the same churches, they're going to the same schools. We've got the same issues. Within Alpharetta, it's not the things you typically see on CNN that are impacting our daily lives and our families and our businesses. And what I took out of last November is it's becoming so intertwined that there's no way for anybody, regardless of whether you're a local elected official or you're just some guy trying to, make a living, to stay out of the national politics. No longer is there, an ability to just make a decision based on traffic, because it boils down to political backgrounds and philosophies. And so I think that's disappointing to me, because quite frankly, last November had nothing to do with local elections, And I mean that because the issues that were discussed had nothing to do with the things that impact the typical Alpharetta on a daily, transportation. Name me a local race that hinged on transportation discussions. Name me a local race that had anything to do with the issues that our residents find important. They might have touched on it, but you ran campaigns. Sure. And look, I think Mary Robichaux has done a tremendous job of reaching out to the city of Alpharetta and being engaged in our community and trying to address whether we agreed or disagreed. So it's not the personalities or the parties who won. I just wish they had focused more on serving the people that they were going to represent.
Sure.
And I hope that will change, but we'll see.
So I want to close on a similar note. You mentioned the national news, even the statewide news can just drown out everything at the local level and totally change the nature of the conversation. What's something, if you want one positive step and something that maybe people need to focus more on that might be getting drowned out, that you're not going to see not only on CNN, but on, 11 Alive at night? So something that's being drowned out that maybe people should be paying a little more attention to, and maybe something positive that's happened as well.
That's a great question. I think, and this has surprised me recently, because over the last year I've spent a tremendous amount of time with our economic development manager, Matthew Thomas, who's doing a wonderful job. And he and I have been very intentional about reaching out to our major employers, because they're the ones that are impacted by many of those local decisions. And one of the things that has shocked me is that many of our major employers are very cognizant of the fact that transportation is a big issue for them, and the ability to retain talent and attract talent from all over the country and the world hinges a great deal on transportation. However, even these business leaders that know it's tremendously important for their success really weren't as up to date on many of the transportation projects that are already going on. And these are the people who really are involved, invested, but they're so busy they don't really have a chance to keep up with as much of the day-to-day stuff that's impacting their businesses. And when you take that down to just me or you, if neither one of us were in politics, they're so busy going to their jobs, trying to get the kids to baseball or ballet and things like that, and going to church and serving their communities. They really aren't getting enough of the information that's impacting them. Hopefully podcasting will help reach people that are in their cars or stuck in traffic or otherwise wouldn't be able to. But I think that's it. It surprises me that no matter how hard the city tries, no matter how hard the state of Georgia tries to get out the things that are involving and trying to get their engagement in, it's difficult to get it done.
What about something positive that's happened in Alpharetta that maybe didn't make all the headlines that you would have liked, maybe?
I don't know that there's too much that doesn't get out there. I think, once again, it's just there's so much noise out there now. There's so many sources that I don't think people are able to filter it very well.
Sure.
I think we're excited about the transportation projects. It's disappointing more people don't know that that's on the way.
Sure.
It's disappointing to a certain extent that more people haven't engaged in that process, although hundreds have shown up for some of the information. The transportation decisions that are being made now are tremendous. Adding 50% capacity on Georgia 400 is going to be a game changer. I think North Point Mall, while there are a lot of people that are aware of what's going on in that area, it's great news. I mean, everybody understands that, man, that area has got to evolve into something that's really significantly attractive to bring people into Alpharetta and build that walkable environment that's take us into the next century. Those are two of the big things. There's a lot of minor things, and I say minor because they're not sexy.
Sure.
We've been working within our public safety department for the past year and spent a tremendous amount of time and energy in helping them in a very difficult environment. As far as we've got a great labor market, there's tremendous pressure, from national news and things like that on people who are trying to serve in the public safety realm. And our department has been able to thrive and grow and succeed. And it's very underreported, but it's one I'm most proud of.
Sure. Well, Mayor Jim Gilvin, thank you for coming on this morning. Thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I hope our listeners learned a lot. We will be back on Friday with our normally scheduled show, but this is Preston Thompson signing off for Georgia Politics Podcast. Thank you for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks.